What would you do if the man you trusted most in the world started keeping dark secrets right before your wedding? You think you know someone completely until you follow them into the woods and discover a truth that shatters your entire reality. This is a story about the devastating weight of grief, the terrifying vulnerability of new love, and a shocking family secret that no one could have ever predicted. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey that will keep you holding your breath until the very last second. Lily grew up in a damp, working-class logging town in the Pacific Northwest, where money was always tight and dreams were often washed away by the relentless rain. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a local diner, Lily learned early on to expect very little from life. Her only anchor was Ethan, a boy who stood up to her bullies in elementary school and never left her side. They were inseparable, bound by a childhood promise to always protect each other. But as they transitioned from naive kids to young adults facing the harsh realities of the world, the lines between deep friendship and romantic love began to blur. Their families expected them to marry, but fate had a much more cruel and twisted plan in store for them. The high school gymnasium was a suffocating sea of shimmering silk, expensive cologne, and blinding neon lights. It was prom night, a milestone that most teenagers had anticipated for years. Lily stood awkwardly near the heavy metal double doors, her fingers anxiously plucking at the hem of her emerald dress. She had sewn the gown entirely by herself, using discounted fabric from the clearance bin at the craft store. It fit her slender frame perfectly, flowing with a quiet elegance, but next to the designer dresses of her wealthy classmates, it felt painfully inadequate. The air was thick with the thumping bass of pop music and the sharp, cruel whispers of the popular girls gathered by the punch bowl. Lily could hear them laughing at her simple seams, their manicured fingers pointing in her direction. Her stomach twisted into painful knots, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to turn around and run back into the cool, damp Oregon night. She felt entirely alone in a room filled with 100 people, trapped in a social hierarchy she could never climb. But then a familiar shadow fell over her, blocking the glaring gymnasium lights. Ethan stepped right in front of her, his broad shoulders shielding her from the mocking stares of the crowd. He looked incredibly handsome in his rented tuxedo, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective anger. He turned toward the group of whispering girls and shot them a look so venomous that they immediately fell silent and scattered. Ethan gently took Lily by the hand, his warm grip instantly calming her racing heart. He leaned in close, his voice cutting through the loud music with absolute sincerity. He told her she was the most beautiful girl in the entire room, and that he didn't care about designer labels or expensive price tags. He pulled her onto the center of the dance floor, completely ignoring the lingering stares of their classmates. As they swayed to a slow, melancholic ballad, Lily buried her face in his chest, feeling a profound sense of safety. Ethan had been doing this since the 4th grade, standing between her and the cruelty of the world. He was her personal superhero, her best friend, and the only person who truly understood the heavy burdens she carried. At that moment, under the spinning disco ball, everything felt perfect. Growing up in a cramped, drafty apartment on the wrong side of town had forced Lily to mature much faster than her peers. Her mother, Sarah, worked tirelessly as a waitress at a highway diner, her hands permanently cracked from harsh soaps and endless shifts. Lily never asked for new toys, trendy clothes, or the latest smartphones. She saw the exhaustion etched into her mother's face and silently vowed never to be a burden. Instead, she spent her afternoons at a local tailor shop, sweeping floors and learning the delicate art of sewing from the elderly owner. Ethan, whose parents were supervisors at the local lumber mill, lived a much more comfortable life, but he never let the financial gap create a wall between them. He would sit on the fire escape outside Lily's bedroom window, sharing half of his sandwiches and talking about his dreams of escaping their small town. They rescued stray kittens behind the laundromat, built forts in the dense pine woods, and shared every secret they ever had. Their bond was forged in the quiet moments of mutual understanding, untouched by the bitter judgments of the outside world. As they navigated the turbulent waters of high school, Their childhood friendship slowly morphed into something heavier and more complicated. Ethan transformed from a scrawny boy into an athletic, confident young man, drawing the attention of almost every girl in their graduating class. Yet, he only had eyes for Lily. He would wait for her by her locker, walk her home through the misty streets, and casually pull her into tight, lingering embraces. Lily accepted his affections as a natural progression of their lifelong bond, but deep down, a quiet doubt gnawed at her heart. They were fundamentally different people. Ethan was a firecracker, bursting with ambition, dreaming of airplanes and vast city skylines. He wanted to feel the adrenaline of a fast-paced life. Lily, on the other hand, was deeply rooted in her quiet existence. The thought of leaving her mother and the familiar, rainy streets of her hometown terrified her. She found comfort in routine, in the rhythmic hum of her sewing machine, and in the predictable nature of their sleepy community. But the expectations of their parents weighed heavily upon them. Everyone assumed they would simply graduate, get married, and live happily ever after. The inevitable fracture happened the summer after graduation, when Ethan was accepted into a prestigious aviation academy in Seattle. The bustling metropolis was hours away, a completely different universe from their quiet logging town. He practically begged Lily to pack her bags and move into a small city apartment with him. But Sarah quickly shut the idea down, reminding them of the crushing reality of their finances. There was no money for city tuition, and Lily could make a decent living, staying home and taking over the tailor shop. The goodbye at the local Greyhound bus station was agonizing. The grey sky poured relentless rain as Ethan held Lily tightly against his chest, refusing to let her go. He made her promise to wait for him, swearing that the distance wouldn't change a single thing between them. His eyes were wide with a desperate, fearful love as he boarded the bus. Lily stood on the wet pavement, watching the red taillights disappear into the heavy coastal fog. A cold, empty feeling settled in her chest. She knew, even then, that the boy who was leaving would not be the same man who eventually returned. Seattle swallowed Ethan whole, wrapping him in a whirlwind of demanding classes, late-night study sessions, and the intoxicating energy of a big city. At first, he called Lily 3 times a day, enthusiastically describing the massive skyscrapers, the bustling waterfront, and the roar of the jet engines. He needed her to share in his excitement, but as the months dragged on, the enthusiastic phone calls became shorter and far less frequent. Ethan was surrounded by ambitious, worldly students who spent their weekends at vibrant clubs and trendy cafes. Meanwhile, Lily's life remained entirely stagnant. She went from her small apartment to the dusty tailor shop, sewing alterations and patching torn jeans. When they did manage to speak on the phone, the conversations felt incredibly forced. The invisible thread of deep, unbreakable trust that had connected them since childhood was slowly fraying. They were living in 2 completely separate realities, struggling to find common ground. If it wasn't for the constant pressure from both sets of parents urging them to plan a wedding, their relationship would have naturally dissolved into a bittersweet memory. The pressure to finalise the wedding plans reached a boiling point during Ethan's brief visit home before his final exams. Their parents had practically booked the local community hall and finalised the guest list without even asking them. Ethan took Lily to a bridal boutique in the nearest city, encouraging her to try on expensive, flowing white gowns. As she stood on the pedestal staring at her reflection in the towering mirrors, she didn't feel like a beautiful bride. She felt like an imposter wearing a disguise. Ethan smiled from the velvet couch, telling her she looked like a queen, but his eyes seemed distant, looking right through her. Lily wanted to scream, to ask him if they were making a massive mistake. She tried to tell him that they felt more like roommates than passionate lovers, but he quickly dismissed her fears, blaming the stress of his upcoming graduation. He kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt entirely mechanical, and told her not to worry. The deep, lingering unease settled heavily in Lily's bones. She loved him, but she was terrified that they were blindly walking toward a lifelong prison built on childhood habits. A few weeks after Ethan returned to Seattle, a violent storm rolled through the Pacific Northwest, Lily tossed and turned in her narrow bed, her mind plagued by a horrific, vivid nightmare. In her dream, Ethan was running away from her barefoot through a dense, foggy forest. He kept waving goodbye, slipping further into the shadows, no matter how fast she sprinted to catch him. When she finally woke up, her sheets were soaked in cold sweat, and her heart was hammering against her ribs. A terrible, suffocating sense of doom washed over her. She immediately grabbed her cell phone and dialed his number, but it went straight to a sterile voicemail. She tried again and again throughout the morning, her panic rising with every passing hour. Ethan was supposed to be safely in his dorm room, studying for his final exams. He never went anywhere without his phone fully charged. She paced the worn carpet of her living room, driving her mother crazy with her frantic worries. Sarah tried to calm her down, brewing hot chamomile tea and insisting that Ethan was just busy, but Lily's intuition screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. The devastating truth arrived the following morning, carried by a chilling phone call that shattered their lives forever. The agonizing screams of Ethan's mother echoed down the quiet suburban street, a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. Ethan was dead. He had been walking near a fast-flowing river outside of Seattle when he saw a young boy slip into the freezing, turbulent rapids. Without a single thought for his own safety, Ethan had dived into the raging water. He managed to push the terrified child onto a stable rock, saving his life, but the icy current had triggered massive cramps in Ethan's legs. He was pulled beneath the dark surface and drowned before help could arrive. When Lily heard the news, her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The world around her lost all its colour, replaced by a deafening, ringing silence. She tore at her hair, completely unable to process the horrific reality. The man who was supposed to be her husband, the boy who had protected her since childhood, was gone. She locked herself in her bedroom, staring at her unworn wedding dress, screaming until her voice gave out entirely. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas, weeping relatives, and solemn military honours. The entire town turned out to mourn the local hero, whispering words of pity as they passed by the pale, trembling girl who was supposed to be his bride. After Ethan was lowered into the damp Oregon soil, Lily completely withdrew from the world. For an entire year, she wore a black ribbon around her wrist, refusing to attend social gatherings or speak to anyone outside of the tailor shop. She spent her evenings sitting alone in the dark, flipping through heavy photo albums filled with pictures of a smiling, vibrant Ethan. She traced his face with her fingertips, agonizing over the tragic unfairness of the universe. The vibrant, warm girl she used to be was buried right alongside her fiancé. Her mother watched her wither away, her heart breaking daily, but nothing Sarah said could penetrate the thick wall of depression Lily had built around herself. She was sleepwalking through life, waiting for her own time to end, convinced that she was uniquely cursed to suffer in eternal, crushing loneliness. One chilly autumn morning, the heavy fog finally began to lift from the town. Lily was rushing to the tailor shop, her head down, lost in her usual dark thoughts. As she turned the corner near the local bakery, she crashed violently into a tall stranger. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and a thick leather folder slipped from the man's grasp, sending dozens of crisp white papers scattering across the wet pavement. Panicking, Lily dropped to her knees, frantically apologizing as she scrambled to gather the damp documents. When she finally looked up, she met a pair of the warmest, most striking hazel eyes she had ever seen. The man was handsome, dressed in a sharp casual suit, and smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive coffee. Instead of snapping at her, a gentle, understanding smile spread across his face. He knelt beside her, his large hands carefully helping her collect the papers. He introduced himself in a deep, soothing voice as Liam, the new manager of the rustic lodge on the edge of town. He looked at her with intense curiosity, asking why someone so beautiful looked so incredibly sad. Flustered and entirely unaccustomed to such direct attention, Lily muttered a quick apology, handed him the messy stack of papers, and practically ran the rest of the way to the shop. But Liam's warm hazel eyes lingered in her mind for the rest of the day, temporarily pushing away the heavy ghost of Ethan. Several days later, as Lily was locking up the shop, under the fading orange sunset, she heard a voice call her name. Liam was standing by the lamp-post, holding a vibrant bouquet of wild autumn flowers. He smiled warmly, admitting that he had asked around town to find out who the mysterious girl from the bakery was. He knew about her tragic loss, but he wasn't looking at her with the usual suffocating pity she hated. Instead, he offered the flowers and boldly invited her to the local cinema to see a new indie movie. He spoke with such genuine kindness and infectious enthusiasm that Lily found her usual defences crumbling. Against all her ingrained instincts to isolate herself, and despite the loud voice in her head telling her she was betraying Ethan's memory, she nervously accepted his invitation. The date at the local cinema quickly transitioned into a late-night dinner at the glowing neon diner on the highway. They slid into a faded red vinyl booth, ordering bitter black coffee and warm cherry pie. Lily intended to stay for exactly 30 minutes, just to be polite, but the conversation flowed with an unexpected, magnetic ease. Liam was incredibly attentive, listening to her every word without ever checking his watch. They discovered a mutual love for classic literature, vintage rock music, and quiet, rainy evenings. Liam spoke passionately about his work managing the lodge, but he remained strangely guarded whenever the topic shifted to his family or his past. He only briefly mentioned that his parents had passed away long ago, leaving a lingering sadness in his eyes that mirrored Lily's own. For the first time in over a year, Lily actually laughed out loud. The heavy, crushing weight on her chest felt miraculously lighter. As he walked her home, under the starry sky, Liam gently brushed his hand against hers, his touch sending a warm, terrifying spark of electricity straight through her veins. When Lily quietly unlocked the door to her apartment, Sarah was waiting up in the kitchen, nursing a mug of herbal tea. The older woman took one look at her daughter's flushed cheeks and bright eyes, and a massive wave of relief washed over her face. Lily excitedly recounted the evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of guilt and newfound joy. She confessed to her mother that she felt terrified of moving on, feeling as though she was abandoning the sacred promise she had made to Ethan. Sarah stood up, walked across the linoleum floor, and pulled her daughter into a fierce, comforting hug. She stroked Lily's hair, her voice thick with emotion, telling her that Ethan would have never wanted her to bury herself alive. The dead do not want the living to suffer in their shadow. Sarah urged her to embrace this unexpected light, to allow herself to be young and happy again. The conversation was a profound turning point. The lingering guilt slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious, blooming hope. Lily finally gave herself the mental permission to open her scarred heart to a new possibility. Liam quickly became a constant, comforting presence in Lily's life. Their romance escalated with a beautiful, dizzying intensity. He was nothing like Ethan. Liam was calm, observant, and deeply romantic, finding joy in small, quiet gestures rather than grand ambitions. He started coming over to the apartment for Sunday dinners, instantly charming Sarah with his polite manners and willingness to fix leaky faucets and broken cabinet hinges. He looked at Lily as if she was the most precious thing he had ever encountered. 6 months into their relationship, while taking a walk near the misty edge of the local lake, Liam stopped, turned to her, and proposed. It wasn't a flashy, expensive production. It was a quiet, desperate plea to build a life together. Lily said yes, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. She had learned the hard way that life was fragile and utterly unpredictable. There was no point in waiting for some perfect future when the present was offering her a chance at true happiness. They began planning a small, intimate wedding, eager to start their new chapter. The only major obstacle facing the young couple was finding a place to live. Renting an apartment in town was expensive, and Lily refused to crowd Sarah in her tiny home. During a quiet evening by the fire, Lily suddenly remembered a forgotten piece of family history. Her late grandfather had left behind an old, rustic cabin hidden deep in the pine woods, a few miles outside of town. It had been abandoned for over a decade, slowly surrendering to the moss and the creeping vines. Lily handed Liam a heavy brass key, suggesting he drive out there to see if the structure was salvageable. She proposed that they could spend their weekends renovating the cabin, turning the dilapidated wood into their own cosy, debt-free home. Liam was initially skeptical, warning her about the potential costs of plumbing and roof repairs, but he agreed to inspect the property. When he returned later that evening, his demeanour had completely shifted. He was unusually energised, aggressively taking notes on construction materials and promising to start the heavy cleaning process by himself the very next day. At first, Lily was absolutely thrilled by Liam's intense dedication to their future home. He spent every spare hour out in the woods, claiming he was tearing down rotted drywall and fixing the shattered windows. But, as the weeks passed, a cold, creeping unease began to settle in Lily's stomach. Liam's behaviour drastically changed. The calm, attentive man she fell in love with was replaced by someone who was constantly on edge. He became incredibly secretive with his phone, turning the screen away whenever she walked into the room. He started missing their scheduled dinners, arriving at her apartment late at night, smelling strongly of damp earth and cheap antiseptic soap. When Lily tried to ask him about the progress at the cabin, he would defensively brush her off, claiming the work was just exhausting his mind. Sometimes he didn't even come back to town to sleep, sending brief, vague text messages that he was staying at the lodge to handle late-night emergencies. The bright, hopeful future Lily had envisioned suddenly felt like it was crumbling underneath her feet. The toxic seeds of suspicion took root in Lily's mind, growing rapidly into a suffocating vine of paranoia. She spent her days at the tailor shop entirely distracted, accidentally pricking her fingers with needles as she agonized over Liam's sudden distance. The dark thoughts consumed her. She convinced herself that she was fundamentally cursed. Just when she was about to find happiness, the universe was ripping it away again. She imagined Liam spending his evenings in the arms of another woman, using the cabin renovation as a convenient, elaborate lie to cover up a sordid affair. Why else would he be so defensive? Why else would he smell like cheap soap and avoid her touch? The humiliation burned in her chest like hot coals. She remembered how Ethan had started to drift away when he moved to the city, and the familiar sting of abandonment brought her to the brink of a massive breakdown. She refused to tell her mother about her fears, not wanting to see the disappointment in Sarah's eyes. Instead, Lily decided that she could no longer live in this agonizing, uncertain purgatory. On a gloomy Tuesday afternoon, a heavy thunderstorm rolled over the logging town. Lily told her boss she was feeling violently ill and left the tailor shop hours before her shift ended. She gripped the steering wheel of her battered sedan, her knuckles turning bone white as she navigated the muddy, treacherous dirt road leading deep into the woods. The rain battered violently against the windshield, matching the furious, chaotic rhythm of her heart. She was determined to catch Liam red-handed. She replayed the confrontation in her mind a dozen times, imagining the look of sheer panic on his face when she busted the door open and found him with his secret lover. She parked her car a few hundred yards away from the cabin, cutting the engine so he wouldn't hear her approach. As she trudged through the wet ferns and thick mud, she saw Liam's truck parked out front. There were no construction tools visible, no piles of discarded wood. The cabin looked completely untouched from the outside, except for a faint flickering yellow light glowing from the back bedroom window. Lily marched up the rotting wooden steps, her blood boiling with a righteous, devastating anger. She didn't bother knocking. She grabbed the heavy iron handle, shoved the door open, and stormed into the dimly lit hallway. The air inside didn't smell like fresh paint or sawdust. It smelled like medicinal ointment, boiling chicken broth, and stale sweat. Liam emerged from the back bedroom, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He was holding a metal bowl and a damp washcloth. He practically tripped backwards, stammering her name, desperately trying to block her view of the room behind him. But Lily shoved past him, tears of rage blurring her vision, demanding to see the woman he was hiding. She burst into the bedroom, ready to scream, but the words died instantly in her throat. There was no mistress. Lying on a miserable, creaky army cot was a frail, emaciated old man. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his bones, and his arms were covered in raw, terrifying burn scars. He was shivering violently under a thin blanket, coughing up a weak, pathetic wheeze. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth agape in absolute shock. The furious fire in her chest was instantly extinguished, replaced by a deep, hollow confusion. Liam dropped the metal bowl onto the floor with a loud clatter. He fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He confessed everything, his voice cracking under the immense weight of the secret. The broken man on the cot was Arthur, his father. Liam explained that he had believed his father was dead for nearly 20 years. But a few weeks ago, this fragile, homeless shell of a man had collapsed near the dumpsters behind the lodge. Liam hadn't recognised him at first beneath the dirt and the overgrown beard, but Arthur had a weathered ID card stuffed in his torn jacket. Liam had panicked. He didn't want to bring a convicted felon and a homeless wanderer into Lily's life, terrified that the scandal would force her to call off the wedding. So he had hidden him in the abandoned cabin, desperately trying to nurse him back to health in secret. As the torrential rain pounded against the thin roof of the cabin, Liam sat on the edge of the cot, gently holding the old man's trembling hand. He told Lily the incredibly tragic story of Arthur's past. Decades ago, Arthur had been a brilliant, wealthy software developer in Seattle. He lived a life of extreme luxury, heavily involved in high society charity events. It was there he met a stunning, manipulative young woman who dazzled him with her beauty. He married her quickly, blinded by love, but the marriage soon turned into a cold, toxic nightmare. Arthur's ultimate dream was to be a father, to fill his massive, empty mansion with the sound of children. But after years of painful medical tests, doctors delivered a crushing blow. Arthur had survived a severe illness, but the treatments had left him completely sterile. The news destroyed him, but it gave his cruel wife the perfect excuse to distance herself entirely. She began spending his fortune recklessly, mocking his desire for a family, and openly carrying on a scandalous affair with his closest friend and business partner. Desperate to fulfill his lifelong dream of fatherhood, Arthur refused to surrender to despair. He walked into a Seattle foster care agency and instantly connected with a fiery 10-year-old boy who desperately wanted a home. That boy was Liam. Arthur formally adopted him, and for 5 glorious years they were the perfect father and son team. They built model airplanes, went camping in the mountains, and forged an unbreakable bond of unconditional love. Liam described those years as the absolute brightest moments of his entire life. But the happiness was a fragile illusion. While Arthur was focused entirely on raising his son, his treacherous wife and his corrupt business partner were orchestrating a massive, illegal, hostile takeover of his software company. They manipulated the financial records, forged Arthur's signature on critical documents, and systematically stripped him of his entire fortune. One morning, Arthur woke up to find his bank accounts frozen, his company seized, and his wife gone, having filed for divorce and leaving him with nothing but a mountain of manufactured debt. The betrayal was too absolute, too devastating for Arthur to process rationally. Driven mad by grief and the sheer injustice of losing everything he had built, Arthur tracked down his former business partner in an underground parking garage. He only wanted answers, demanding to know how a friend could be so utterly cruel. But the confrontation escalated violently. The partner mocked Arthur, laughing at his ruined life and insulting Liam's status as a foster kid. Blinded by rage, Arthur threw a punch. The partner stumbled backward, his head violently striking a concrete pillar. He died before the paramedics even arrived on the scene. Arthur was immediately arrested, tried, and sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security prison for manslaughter. The state intervened, and a traumatized, heartbroken teenage Liam was dragged kicking and screaming back into the cold, unforgiving foster care system. Arthur's life was officially over. He spent his days in a concrete cell, agonizing over the fact that he had failed the only person who had ever truly loved him. When Arthur was finally released from prison, he was an old, broken man entering a digital world that had completely passed him by. His health was rapidly failing, and the crushing guilt of abandoning Liam kept him from reaching out. He fell into a deep depression, eventually losing his cheap apartment and ending up on the brutal streets of Seattle. He survived by eating from garbage cans and sleeping under highway overpasses, punishing himself daily. A few months ago, a group of cruel teenagers had thrown fireworks into his nylon tent while he was sleeping. Arthur barely escaped, suffering horrific burns across his arms and chest. Knowing his time was running out, he used his last remaining dollars to buy a bus ticket to the logging town, having heard a rumour from an old contact that Liam was managing a lodge there. He didn't want money. He just wanted to look at his son's face one last time before dying in the cold. He had collapsed by the dumpsters, completely exhausted, right where Liam had miraculously found him. The secret wasn't a betrayal. It was a desperate act of preservation. Lily listened to the horrifying, heartbreaking tale, her own petty insecurities melting away into profound shame. She had spent weeks crying over an imaginary mistress, while the man she loved was carrying the unbearable weight of his father's broken life alone. She looked at Liam, his face pale and streaked with tears, waiting for her to yell, to leave, to call off the engagement. Instead, Lily quietly walked over to the corner of the room. She rolled up the sleeves of her blouse, poured fresh, warm water into the metal basin, and picked up a bar of antibacterial soap. She knelt beside the creaky cot, gently dipping the cloth into the water. With an incredible, tender grace, she began to carefully wash the grime and dried blood from Arthur's burned arms. Liam watched in absolute awe as his fiancé tended to the homeless ex-convict with the gentle compassion of an angel. Lily looked over her shoulder, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and told Liam that they were a family now. They would never abandon his father, and they were going to fix this broken man together. The massive crisis forged a bond between Lily and Liam that was stronger than anything she had ever experienced. They immediately packed up their essentials and moved into the drafty cabin full-time. The lack of modern comforts, hauling water from the well, chopping wood for the iron stove, and washing clothes by hand felt trivial compared to the immense purpose of keeping Arthur alive. Surrounded by Lily's fierce motherly care and Liam's constant presence, the old man slowly began to pull back from the brink of death. His terrible burns turned into pink, healing scars. He started eating solid food, and the hollow, haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a gentle, profound gratitude. Arthur spent his evenings sitting by the crackling fireplace, weeping softly as he thanked Lily for saving his life and forgiving his past. He insisted that he didn't want to be a burden and promised to leave once he was strong enough. But Lily fiercely shut that down, gripping his frail hands and telling him that he was her father-in-law and he would live in their home until the end of his days. With Arthur steadily recovering and Lily pregnant with their first child, the couple decided they couldn't wait any longer. They moved the wedding date up, deciding to host a small, intimate ceremony right there on the porch of the heavily renovated cabin. The morning of the wedding was crisp and beautiful, the surrounding pine trees smelling of fresh rain and blooming wildflowers. Lily was in the small kitchen, wearing her simple white dress, adjusting her veil, while Liam helped Arthur put on a handsome borrowed suit in the back room. Sarah drove up the muddy driveway in her rusty sedan, carrying a massive tray of homemade pastries for the celebration. She bustled through the front door, complaining happily about the dirt on her shoes, entirely focused on seeing her daughter in a wedding dress. Just as Sarah set the heavy tray down on the wooden dining table, Arthur slowly walked out of the bedroom, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He looked up, offering a polite, nervous smile to the mother of the bride. The moment their eyes locked, the air in the cabin violently vanished. Sarah let out a piercing, breathless gasp. The colour instantly drained from her face, her eyes widening in absolute paralysing horror. She took one shaky step backward, clutching her chest, and collapsed onto the hardwood floor in a dead faint. Chaos erupted in the cabin. Liam rushed to grab smelling salts, while Lily dropped to her knees, screaming for her mother to wake up. Arthur stood frozen, leaning against the doorframe, his face ashen, whispering the name Sarah over and over again, like a frantic prayer. When Sarah finally fluttered her eyes open, she looked at the old, scarred man and began to sob uncontrollably. The devastating truth poured out of her in a rush of broken sentences. 30 years ago, before Arthur was rich and before Sarah was a weary waitress, they had shared a passionate, wild summer romance. They had fought fiercely over his ambitions, and Sarah, proud and stubborn, had packed her bags and vanished into the Oregon woods. What she never told him, what she had hidden from the entire world for decades, was that she was pregnant with his child. Lily was Arthur's biological daughter. The revelation struck the cabin like a massive bolt of lightning. Arthur fell to his knees, burying his face in Lily's dress, sobbing with a joy and agony so deep it shook his frail bones. The universe had taken everything from him, only to lead his adopted son right to the doorstep of his biological daughter. The wedding proceeded through tears of absolute disbelief and overwhelming love. The broken pieces of their tragic lives had miraculously snapped together to form a perfect, resilient family. Months later, under the grey Oregon sky, Lily walked through the quiet town cemetery. Her pregnant belly was heavy and round. She stopped by a polished marble headstone and found Ethan's grieving mother placing fresh lilies on the grass. Lily knelt down, taking the older woman's hand, and softly promised that her soon-to-be-born son would be named Ethan, honouring the boy who had protected her so that she could live long enough to find her true destiny. As she walked back toward the woods, Lily placed a hand on her stomach, finally understanding that true love isn't just about survival, it's about leading you exactly where you belong. Will you have the courage to forgive the past when fate finally knocks on your door? If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, what is the biggest secret your family has ever kept? In a breathtaking twist of fate, the homeless man Liam hid in the woods turned out to be Lily's biological father, connecting their fractured past into a beautiful, unbreakable future. Lily forgave the ghosts of her tragedy, naming her newborn son after the hero who saved her childhood. True love healed the deepest wounds of 3 broken generations. Thank you so much for watching this emotional journey. If this story brought tears to your eyes, please hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible cinematic tales, and drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered a shocking family secret that changed everything? We want to hear your story.